Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolute wild and wonderfully fascinating world of biblical numbers. We're shifting our whole perspective here from literal, dry math to this incredibly beautiful, highly structured literary and theological language. Look, if you've ever tried reading these ancient texts and suddenly found your eyes just totally glazing over at weird measurements, endless ages, or those massive census counts, well, you are definitely not alone. Sometimes it literally feels like reading a 3,000-year-old tax return, right? But here's the thing. You might just be looking at the text through the wrong lens. So let's learn how to read the cipher.
Okay, let's kick things off with a little puzzle. What do the infamous, terrifying 666, a grueling 40-day desert trek, and a massive army of 144,000 actually have in common? To crack this ancient cipher, we really have to wrap our heads around the fact that these aren't literal head counts. And they certainly aren't spooky fortune-telling tropes either. In these texts, these numbers are highly structured symbols. They're carefully chosen, almost like a secret code, to convey much, much deeper meanings about God, humanity, and creation itself. And that brings us to the concepts of symbolic numerology and gematria. Think of these as your essential master keys for reading this material not just as basic arithmetic, but as rich poetry and theology. See, ancient writers used a system where numbers signaled recognizable patterns of character, covenant, and redemptive work. Take the practice of gematria, for instance. This is where letters actually possess numerical values. So the Hebrew name David mathematically equates to the number 14. Now think about what happens when the Gospel of Matthew intentionally organizes an entire genealogy into structured groups of exactly 14 generations. The author isn't just showing off his math skills. There's a massive, flashing theological claim happening right beneath the surface about the Davidic identity of the Messiah. Pretty cool, right?
Section 1. The perfect backbone numbers.
All right, so the numbers 3, 7, 10, and 12. These are the structural pillars of this entire ancient symbolic world. Honestly, to truly crack the code, we absolutely have to know these basic building blocks. 3 signifies divine perfection and solidity. Just think of the incredibly common third-day motif, where rescue finally arrives after a period of intense waiting. 7 is the ultimate number of spiritual perfection, covenant, and completeness, rooted right there in the 7-day creation week. 10, that represents ordinal or structural perfection. And 12 is all about governmental perfection and the ordered people of God. Seriously, once you internalize these 4 numbers, you basically have the master keys to unlock the whole system.
Let's look a bit closer at one of those pillars, 10. What's so fascinating here is how 10 provides a totally natural basis for completeness, starting with our very own biology. We have 10 fingers and 10 toes. Because of this natural foundation for counting, the ancients arranged Q realities into tens to signify a whole set or a complete structural order. We see this brilliantly executed in the 10 Commandments. They aren't just a random list of rules. They are a complete, overarching summary of covenant stipulations. We also see it in the 10 plagues of Egypt. Again, not just a random sequence of disasters. It represented a fully completed, perfectly structured cycle of divine judgment against an oppressive empire. When you see 10, it means the structure is sound and full, the whole shebang.
Section 2. Tension, testing, and transformation.
So, we've got our perfect numbers down. But what happens when numbers fall just short of or slightly exceed those perfect foundations? Well, that is where the story gets really juicy. When we contrast the perfect 7 against the number 6, we see this striking narrative tension. 7 is divine west, it's spiritual perfection. 6, however, is bound to the creation of humanity on the 6th day. Because of that, it signals human incompleteness or fallenness. It's a profoundly frustrated number. It stands awkwardly and honestly quite painfully, exactly one step short of divine rest. It represents humanity in all its creatureliness, striving and striving, but always falling just shy of its ultimate fulfillment. And this leads us to a crucial point. When we encounter the notorious 666 in the Book of Revelation, we really need to leave behind our modern horror movie tropes and heavy metal album covers. It's not a random evil code. It isn't a spooky barcode. It is an intensified 6. It represents the consummate human and demonic opposition to God. But, catch this, because it is fundamentally built on the number 6, its very nature reveals a profound theological truth. It still utterly fails to reach the divine perfection of 7. It's complete, it's intense, and it's total opposition, yet it is doomed to always fall one step short.
We see this exact same narrative tension playing out around the perfect 12. Remember, 12 is ordered government and the people of God, like the 12 tribes or the 12 apostles. So 11 naturally represents a transitional waiting state. It sits one beyond the fullness of 10, but falls short of 12. Just think of the deeply anxious state of the 11 apostles left right after Judas's betrayal, waiting for their definitive number to be restored. On the flip side of perfection, 13 stands one step beyond ordered government. It signals a breaking of that order: rebellion, apostasy, absolute chaos.
Okay, let's shift gears and see how this system builds into one of the most unambiguously symbolic numbers in the entire source material, a number you see absolutely everywhere. Yep, the number 40.
40 acts as the ultimate temporal bracket for crisis and transformation. Basically, it's a divine training montage. Whenever you encounter a 40, you're being tipped off that a massive period of testing, trial, and intense preparation is underway. The repetition is honestly staggering. We see 40 days and nights of rain washing the world clean during the flood. An entire generation undergoes 40 years of wandering and testing in the wilderness. Moses spends 40 days on Mount Sinai receiving the law. Elijah makes an arduous 40-day journey. And Jesus faces a grueling 40 days of temptation. In every single instance, it's a divinely appointed crucible. It's where God tests or prepares individuals for a monumental new phase in his redemptive plan. Now, going back to our perfect 7 for a quick second, let's look at what happens when a number successfully steps beyond it, rather than falling short. While 6 is frustrated and incomplete, the number 8 steps joyfully beyond the complete 7-day cycle of the old creation. 8 represents a new creation, a totally new beginning. This is embedded deeply in ancient practices, like circumcision occurring exactly on the 8th day, which marks a brand new covenant identity. Early Christian reflection also strongly connected this concept to Christ's resurrection. That occurred on the first day of a new week, often styled as the 8th day, which inaugurates an entirely new creation that breaks right past the original 7-day rhythm of history.
Section 3. Multiplying the master equations.
Now that we've got our base building blocks, it's so fascinating to see how this builds into these grand architectural theological concepts. If you start with the spiritual perfection of 7 and you multiply it by the structural completeness of 10, you get 70. 70 is this incredibly rich composite number that symbolizes divinely allotted fullness, especially regarding nations, leadership, and eras of time. This is exactly why we see exactly 70 nations listed in Genesis. It's why Moses appoints exactly 70 elders to lead. It's why the grand exile of Israel is decreed to last 70 years, and why Jesus later sends out 70 disciples on a mission to all nations. The math itself creates the profound meaning of total completeness. For sheer jaw-dropping scale, the ancients used round numbers like 100 and 1000 as ultimate intensifiers. They elevate a state of completeness to a much, much higher power. So when the ancient Psalms speak of God owning the cattle on 1,000 hills, we are definitely not meant to read that literally. I mean, does God only own the livestock on exactly 1,000 hills and the cattle on hill 1001 belong to some guy named Bob? Of course not. It's a poetic intensifier meaning absolutely all of creation. When the book of Revelation speaks of 1,000 years, it's using this exact same intensifier to describe a divinely perfect, entirely complete era, raising a time frame to its absolute maximum power. And here is where all the puzzle pieces finally click together to solve one of the most famously misunderstood texts in history. How do we get the mysterious 144,000? Well, we take the governmental covenant number of 12 and we square it. 12 times 12 equals 144. This represents the people of God totally united and intensified. Then we multiply that by 1,000, our ultimate intensifier of scale. And boom, that gives us 144,000. It is emphatically not a literal head count of exactly how many people get to fit into a VIP room in heaven. It is a stunning mathematical portrait of the entire, perfected, fully consummated community of the redeemed across all of time. Mind-blowing, right? Section 4. Counting versus reading. Understanding this divine math fundamentally changes how we interact with these texts. But hold on, we have to be careful here. The crucial point is that not every single number is a secret code. Sometimes 5 sheep really just means a farmer had 5 sheep. So to know the difference, we have to look for specific, recognizable indicators. Is the genre of the text apocalyptic or highly poetic? Are we seeing a suspicious, structured repetition of specific numbers over and over again? Does the number have an obvious thematic resonance within the story being told? These are our massive, flashing neon clues that we need to switch our brains from doing basic arithmetic to reading deep, literary symbols.
We have to carefully distinguish between ordinary counting and this rich tapestry of symbolism. We must recognize that while not every single numerical reference bears a hidden meaning, an overwhelming number of them encode massive theological claims about creation, covenant, judgment, and salvation right into the very fabric of the math employed. Honestly, to miss this is to miss the beauty of the text itself. We are reading a masterfully woven tapestry, not some dry accounting ledger. Which leaves us with a fascinating, highly provocative question to close out this explainer. If the ancients used numbers as a beautifully structured poetic language to communicate their absolute deepest truths about God and reality, what other profound symbols are we completely missing when we stubbornly force these ancient texts to be read purely literally? It definitely makes you want to go back and read these pages with a completely fresh set of eyes, doesn't it? Thank you so much for exploring the Divine Cipher with me today. See you next time.